Well, thank you everyone for joining. There's still people joining in between as well. Just want to thank you for joining our first Youth in Mind, Youth in Mind Berkshire webinars of the year. This afternoon we're really excited to give you a wonderful insight from the Emotionally Based School Avoidance team. That includes Dr. Alec, one of our senior educational psychologists, Claire Thomas, senior educational psychologist and strategic lead for the mental health support teams based in Reading, and Sharon Priest, who is a social worker and currently a SEND consultant, working in the RISE team for Bright Futures. As we move through, uh, we understand there will be questions and you'll be given a chance to ask questions later. So please use the Q&A button and we'll pose as many of the questions as we have time for. And if you have a question that you particularly would like an answer to, please do like it and we'll highlight those chosen questions as well. But now I'm going to pass over to Alec, Claire and Sharon.
Hello, so I'm starting this. So what is EBSA? So as I say, my name's Sharon Priest. I work as a RISE consultant. So what is EBSA? It's emotionally based school avoidance. It's a pattern of absence whereby reluctance or refusal to attend or stay in an educational setting has its base in anxiety or fear. It's also sometimes called EBSNA. I know that was something that people were quite keen on changing it, which would be emotionally based school non-attendance. But I think really overall, EBSA seems to be the phrase that has stayed and endured. So what is EBSA? It's about anxiety or fear of coming to school or often actually being in a community setting. I think it's always really key to start with the fact that actually anxiety is a very, very natural feeling that we have. And in fact, it is an instinct that we possess that keeps us safe. So it's very much something that we all need, we all experience, we all have those fears and anxieties, and it is what keeps us safe. But it's when that becomes over involved and that becomes then it incapacitates us somewhat, and that's where we talk about with EBSA. So the EBSA, it can be a result of the interplay between personal, family, school, or wider environmental issues. It's not a diagnosis, but it can be seen as a special educational need. So certainly when I was managing the EBSA team, children who were experiencing EBSA were very regularly put onto the school SEN register. Because it's accepted that it is actually a need and a mental health issue. Next slide, Alec. So the prevalence of it is the UK literature reveals that 1 to 5% of the school population are absent from school due to emotional reasons. So that's quite a high number of children. I think that's quite old data, but I think very much it's still a relevant figure. I think that most schools would say that they have a number of children that are not attending, and they consider that to be linked to their EBSA needs and their levels of anxiety and emotional distress around coming into school. Anxiety is very often in school related to exam stress, but I think what we have recognised since understanding EBSA and the role of it is that actually it's also very much linked to key transition points. So we find that the ages of 5 to 6, when children are going from nursery settings into the actual school environment, and also 11 to 13, when children progress from primary schools to secondary schools, they are peak periods for school avoidance behaviours to start and to really start to present in a much more persistent way. Next slide. research suggests that students with special educational needs and disability, particularly neurodiversity, such as autism and ADHD, put them at increased risk of developing EBSA, and that's very much what we found within the EBSA team. We did find that we didn't expect it when we started, but we did on our spreadsheet just think we would record that just as a point of interest to see whether actually those who we were working with also presented with a level of neurodiversity, and we found that it was a very, very significant number of children also either were on the pathway waiting for diagnosis or actually had a diagnosis of neurodiversity. So that was quite interesting for us, but it clearly talks about the need for SEND awareness for these children. It's not just a naughty behaviour, it is linked to their emotional well-being. The children experiencing EBSA are more likely to experience emotional and mental health difficulties such as anxiety disorders and depression. We did find that young people, once they are in this pattern of the EBSA and not coming into school, it's for them very often they want to come to school, they really want to be in there, but it's that they get to the front door and then they just can't go, and then as time goes on it gets more and more difficult and they become more and more debilitated. And so when we actually were working with young people within the EBSA team, we found that a lot of them weren't getting out of bed in the morning, they weren't washing, they weren't eating regular meals. Sometimes they very much became nocturnal. So in the daytime when the family were up and busy and doing things, they were just laying in bed and they couldn't do things. And then when it was quiet at night, then they would get up. So that's a real level of mental health difficulties. That's a significant disability, and then it's quite difficult for them to readjust that. Next slide, please. Clearly, EBSA was very much related to the COVID pandemic, and it was following that really EBSA was identified, though I rather suspect that EBSA has always been a factor for some young people. They've always struggled with school. But certainly the lockdown, schools closing, and education being offered online really helped some of our young people with neurodiversity. They really liked that because it was the things that they found gave them anxiety, such as being in busy classrooms, lots of noises, lots of smells, lots of distractions. They didn't have that anymore. They were just at home and they were comfortable and they were doing their thing as they wanted to. So, but that also led to a disconnection with others. So they weren't having those friendships and those relationships. So they didn't have that need for that social connection. And then for some of them, they found they didn't mind that because actually it was easier, less stressful. But for some, it then was how to then relearn how to do those things, because for some people with neurodiversity, making those connections is quite difficult. So it'd be learning that. So that limited contact with school staff as well meant there was a need to rebuild those relationships, and accepting that change from the parent being the main person with their education again to school staff, school rules, and all those difficulties and those challenges for those young people, interacting with peers in different ways, leading to changes in relationship and potentially peer group dynamics, and issues around friendships. They were clearly a part of that EBSA. For some of our young people with the EBSA, they were really keen to get back to school because there was a particular friendship that they wanted to remake, but for others that was quite difficult. It also reduced their access to the curriculum, meaning that the children or young person had fallen behind on the schoolwork or was worried about catching up. And that for a lot of our EBSA young people, once they miss, you only have to miss a week at school and then you're behind on stuff, and you don't know what homework's due in, you've missed a particular section of your learning. Everyone else, you kind of catastrophize in yourself and think everyone else knows so much more, and then it kind of makes you feel, actually I really can't go because now I'd be showing that I wasn't there. The other thing that young people with EBSA said was difficult for them is sometimes if they did go back into the classroom, it might be that the teacher would say to them, "Oh, very nice to see you again, John Smith," or whatever, "where have you been?" Those things are very difficult for children. So it is, you know, if we were getting young people, when we were getting young people back into school, we were saying, you know, it's really key that the teacher just kind of normalised it, really. And also in terms of that, it's about the changes in how we build our relationships. So there's a lot more about online relationships. Next slide. So it's really key about some of the, like those relationships. We do so much more online now, and you know, we all sort of do so much more shopping online, and all of those things can give us a lot less stress, or not when the bill comes in. In terms of autism and EBSA, there was, as I say, that very, very strong link between those with the EBSA and also those with ADHD, because obviously they've not been used to that, having to sit still in a chair, and those things are quite difficult. That sensory overload, to be able to manage to do those things that are so key for us learning in school. And the heightened anxiety, it's kind of cyclical, so it leaves a poor concept of changes in routine. That's quite stressful, as I say. The changes with the transition, changes in the routine, those things all cause stress for young people. For girls as well, there's a lot of in the media at the moment around girls are masking with their EBSA needs and their neurodiversity, trying so hard, and then at the end of the day it just all becomes too much and they get that burnout. So and caused by all of these things that we can see here about poor concept of time, don't understand the rules, so sort of remembering all that about the rules, anxious about failure, plus all the sensory overload of the busy classroom, the smells and everything, and it just can lead some young people to really, really be stressed and find school just a very, very difficult environment to be in. And next one, I think that's Claire then, isn't it? Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. Hi, everyone. My name's Claire Thomas. As Lou said at the beginning, I'm a senior educational psychologist and I co-manage the mental health support teams in Reading. So we're not directly part of the EBSA team but we work a lot with young people experiencing anxiety in school. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Alec. I'm going to start by talking a little bit around some of the psychological concepts that help us understand how EBSA develops over time and how those patterns of behaviour that Sharon's described are maintained with children and young people. So we're going to look at three different sort of areas of psychological concepts, starting with the anxiety model, which we work with a lot in the MHST. So I think we'll go straight to the next one, please, Alec. Thank you. So it's a little bit small in the inner circle, but there's that, as Sharon mentioned, there's that cyclical process. Oops, I've just pressed a button. There we go. Cyclical process that happens around anxiety. So a young person might be feeling those anxious feelings about going to school or remaining in school. That can then lead to those negative thoughts. There's a link between thoughts, feelings and behaviours there. So a young person might be worried about their ability to cope or to manage in the school system. They might be worried about falling behind, as Sharon mentioned. And the more a young person might experience those negative thoughts, the more likely they are then to avoid that situation that's invoking those feelings of anxiety. It's the same for any person experiencing anxiety in this way. So you'd have those anxious feelings, link them with those anxious thoughts, and that impacts on our behaviour. So if you're feeling anxious about a situation, if you avoid it, immediately those anxious feelings reduce. So as Sharon was saying, these young people who are struggling with EBSA are really keen to go to school. They might get to the front door, but the anxiety builds so much in them that then that impacts their behaviours. They might step back, avoid going into school or into a particular lesson even. Immediately the levels of anxiety reduce, so they feel better, and so then that cycle maintains itself. So it's about the support that we can offer, which I think we'll talk a little bit further on, is thinking about how we can break that cycle. So as Sharon was saying, that maintenance, then avoiding school means that you miss out on key pieces of work, you might lose touch with friendship groups, you might have increasing levels of anxiety because of that. And actually, like a lot of young people experienced in the COVID-19 pandemic, sometimes it's nicer to be at home than it is at school. And then it never breaks the cycle of those anxious feelings. So when we're exploring anxiety with young people, whether that's about anxiety about going to school, separating from a parent, a particular anxiety related, say, to a subject or exams, for example, what our practitioners do is really unpick what we call the hot cross bun. So we think about, with the young person directly, what physical symptoms they might be experiencing, how does it feel in their body, what thoughts do they have, what feelings are going on for them, and what that means for their behaviours. So we look at that cycle and then think about goals that the young person is looking to achieve and work with them to break those down into achievable steps. And repeated practice then habituates those anxious feelings. So the more you try and put yourself in that anxious situation, as long as that's safe, what young people learn or can learn then is that you might feel anxious and that anxiety peaks, but the body can't maintain a high level of anxiety over a long period of time. So in theory, each time you experience that negative stressor, in this case school or lesson, for example, and we teach strategies to manage those anxious feelings. When that happens repeatedly over time in very small steps and in a very gradual way, the young person learns to manage those anxious feelings. Okie dokie. I think we'll go to the next one, if that's okay, Alec. Thank you. So the next slide, or the next, I think there might be a lovely picture of a seesaw that might pop up. I'm not sure, but there it is. So the next slide, it just helps us think about what balances stresses and support factors for a young person. So I think there's been some research that one of the factors involved in young children, young people experience that emotionally based school avoidance is when the stress factors exceed the support factors. And this is just conceptualized in a different way in terms of push factors and pull factors. So push in this model are those factors that help a young person attend school, and pull are those ones that prevent the young person. And that sounds very simplistic. I think in reality, the whole there's a complex interplay of factors that are going on for a young person. So there's factors going on for that young person. There are school-based factors. I think Alec's going to talk about that a bit later on, and home-based factors. So this makes it perhaps look a bit more simple than it is, but it helps unpick what might be going on for an individual young person when they're feeling that anxiety around going to school. So there's rarely a single cause, and then there's rarely a single solution. It's about a multifactorial response to support the child, the school, and the family to reduce those feelings of anxiety around school. I think I might be ready for the next one. Yes, thank you, Alec. So just make sure I get it around the right way. So the push factors are those ones that are encouraging young people to attend school, to overcome those anxious feelings, which might be a close friendship group. It might be their academic learning and that they're competent and they've got goals they want to achieve in terms of their exam grades, future careers. they might be a positive relationship with a particular member of staff, and quite often that can really be pivotal in supporting a young person if they've got that trusted adult that they can meet with and check in with regularly throughout the school day. Those which can also then help them experience success and positive feelings associated with being in school. And as I mentioned before, teaching a young person about the link between thoughts, feelings and behaviour in that sort of hot cross bun can really help them understand where those anxious feelings come from and how brains react to feeling anxious. Because as Sharon said, a level of anxiety is normal for everybody. It's how human beings survive. But sometimes brains aren't always our best friends, and sometimes in some circumstances your brain can tell you something's really scary and frightening, whereas actually you need to be able to access that thing to be able to achieve the goals that you'd like to do. And what's really key is for that young person to feel listened to and understood, and for their worries and fears to be validated by the adults around them supporting them, whether that's in-school staff, their family, or outside professionals working with them. Pull factors, there's just a few listed there in terms of those factors that are making it difficult for a child to attend. Anxiety about separating from a parent, particularly with younger children, peer relationship difficulties or with a member of staff, and bullying comes quite often within that sort of area, that those difficult relationships with peers. Again, as Sharon said, transition to secondary school and those first 2 years of secondary are really common trigger for EBSA difficulties. Might be difficulties with a particular subject, could be a change in a family dynamic. Sometimes there can be a family history of EBSA. As Sharon has already mentioned, a young person having special educational needs or being neurodivergent has a massive impact on potentially on whether they'll experience EBSA. There may be a particular traumatic event which could include loss or bereavement that is a triggering factor. And again, what's really important to note here, that it's not just about those factors being within the child or young person. It's systems around, they can be around that child or young person that also have a big part to play, whether that's the school system in terms of academic demands, not the child not being able to meet those demands. It might be they've got, as I said, special educational needs, that they're struggling to access the curriculum. I think I've covered all I wanted to say on that one. Thank you, Alec. For the next one, please. Okay, and then in a minute we're going to coordinate these into one giant lovely model and picture. But in terms of this one, again, and apologies, it's quite small words, but if you think about, so this model sort of conceptualizes thinking about EBSA over time and thinking about what are those predisposing risk factors, which might be things like change in school, going to secondary school in year 7. It might be a history of separation anxiety as a younger child. So there might be some predisposing risk factors for that child or young person. There might be a particular triggering event, which might be things like experiencing bullying in school, experiencing loss or bereavement. And then those maintenance factors that keep that cycle of anxiety going round and round. So it might be that, you know, like it was in COVID for some young people, being at home was really provided them with a safe space. So the thought of going back into school was very anxiety provoking. And then as we talked about in the first model of anxiety, that cycle then can be maintained unless we find a way to support the child to break that cycle and experience school in a different way that lowers their experience of anxiety. Okie dokie. What else did I need to say about that one? Well, I think we might be ready to go on to the next one, Alec, please. Thank you. So what we've looked about there is this is just the 2 separate models. So we've got the anxiety cycle and EBSA on the right that we talked about first, where those anxious thoughts and feelings and sensations occur. leading to avoidance of that situation that provokes anxiety. It feels better, we feel less anxious, and then you're more likely to continue avoiding school, coupled with the model of EBSA over time, where there may be predisposing risk factors triggering events and then leading to that maintenance cycle. And that leads neatly on to the combined model, or what they call an integrated model, which for me makes the most sense because it's a complex picture when we're thinking about emotionally based school avoidance, and there's that co-occurrence, the interaction with all of those factors that we need to take into account when we're supporting children and young people to become less anxious about attending school. And thinking about where we intervene and how we intervene in a mindful way that has the most impact for children and young people. And I think I'm going to stop talking now, and I think I'm handing over to Alec for the next section. Thanks, Alec.
So yeah, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Alec Somers. As mentioned at the beginning, I'm the manager of the RISE team, which Sharon works in, and I'm also an educational psychologist by trade. And the RISE team is sort of a SEND advisory service. So typically when schools are struggling to meet the needs of a child for whatever reason, we will go in and help the school identify strategies. And we do frequently have schools raising EBSA as an issue. So we're very happy to be here today talking to you. Thank you so much for starting, Sharon and Claire. So we're going to be talking about, we're going to start off by talking about the 4 functions of EBSA. So there's no single cause for EBSA, and there's likely to be lots of contributing factors towards why a child may be finding it difficult to attend school. However, in research literature, EBSA is often underpinned by several complex and interlinked factors. And Kearney and Silverman in 1990 reviewed the literature, and what they found is that there were 4 key drivers for school avoidance. Now, that doesn't mean every child who experiences EBSA could fit nicely into one of these 4 boxes. It means that when we're trying to understand what's driving EBSA, usually there's aspects of each one of those. So the first one is avoiding uncomfortable feelings brought by attending school. So that could be noisy environments, sensory needs. So we know children with autism are disproportionately represented in the EBSA population, and academic pressures as well. These could all be factors that mean when a child is at school, it's an uncomfortable experience for them. And that is one of the functions of EBSA, to avoid those uncomfortable experiences. It could also be to avoid situations that could be stressful, such as academic demands or pressures of the school environment. They could be things such as trying to adhere to social pressures. Children and young people who've experienced bullying. We know, again, that's another group who are disproportionately represented in the EBSA population. And also maybe not having relationships, feeling you have better relationships elsewhere. So maybe not feeling that would be something else, but in terms of, feeling that those relationships are unsatisfactory, not getting on with your teachers and not getting on with your peers. It may also be to reduce separation anxiety, or to gain attention from significant others. So that could be wanting to be near your parents, wanting to be near your family members, wanting to be near your siblings. Quite often we see kids come to RISE who have had parents who've had illnesses, and actually the original sort of trigger for the EBSA is wanting to be around their parent to look after them. And it can also be as well rewarding experiences outside of school. So lots of children get a lot more out of playing video games than they do going to school and being in lessons or meeting their friends. And it's those, that's the sort of pull factor, having those rewarding experiences that don't exist at school. Here's a list of common causes associated with school avoidance as well. And as discussed in previous slides, anxiety is specifically associated with EBSA. So it follows that different anxiety disorders are associated with school avoidance. We also need to think about some learning difficulties as well. So all these things you can see on the screen, we know if a child experiences those things, they are more likely or at higher risk of experiencing EBSA. Doesn't mean, of course, that any child with social anxiety will automatically become an EBSA kid. What we know is there's more more young people with all those things on the screen now represented in the EBSA population than there is in the school attending population. So what we've got to be really aware of when working with kids who are experiencing EBSA is that all these things that might be going on for them are part of the picture as to why their needs are presenting the way they are. So in line with the SEN code of practice, what we try and do with all SEN needs, but this is just as important with EBSA, is that assess, plan, do, review cycle. And what is most important with EBSA, and probably this is, many of you are coming here with kids in mind who are sort of quite far down this line, which is obviously very, very difficult, but wherever possible, what we know is the earlier intervention, the better. So when a child or young person starts to feel anxious, it's really important that we think about, referrals to teams like the mental health support team, which Claire manages, because what we know is when young people are starting to worry, getting the support then and giving them guided self-help is what is going to nip it in the bud, essentially. So early intervention is really important, and we're thinking a lot in the local authority right now how we can get that sort of intel to us early, because quite often, I'm sure many of you know, I know there's some parents, carers here today, it's the parent and carers who recognize these things first. So it's the people directly interacting with the child. So it can be the child asking for lots and lots of reassurance. It can be the young person in secondary school talking to their tutor saying that they're worried about going to their math lesson or their English lesson. Returning to school at the earliest opportunity with increased support and a shared understanding is also very important. There can be a temptation from either parents, carers, or even professionals to withdraw the young person out of school to give sort of emotional respite, because there's very, very high emotions often associated. However, the longer the child is out of school, the more difficult it is for the child to return to the school. And you can become sort of entrenched in your anxiety management strategies, which means that it's very hard to break out of them. And once a young person is out of school, they can become increasingly isolated from any protective factors that their school placement once provided them. So this is why it's so important to encourage young people to return to school as quickly as possible, with increased support if that's needed. It's also really important to listen to the child's voice and develop a shared narrative. In planning a return to school or stabilizing a young person's school placement, it's really important to listen and have a strong focus on the child's voice and develop a shared narrative around the EBSA. So identifying the key drivers of that EBSA behavior. We all have a unique perspective, and as schools, you'll have your own, parents will have their own as well, and therefore networks can become disconnected easily. And we should really aim to unite our efforts to support the child to return to education in a capacity that feels safe and supported. And that's about having really good communication and building positive relationships between school and home. I know Sharon and I have talked about this frequently outside of here, and one of the most anecdotally the biggest predictors of success is where there's real positive talk at home and at school about going to school and the benefits you get from it, and making sure that narrative is shared by all parties. So matching those underlying needs and co-production is really important. So we should ensure that the support offered matches a child's underlying needs. So if we think about that slide from a couple of slides ago, where we were talking about things like dyslexia, if the child has dyslexia and we feel that there's some work avoidance going on because the dyslexia is one of the things that makes being in lessons really anxiety provoking, it's really important that that's included in the plan or the reintegration plan, and that's co-produced with the young person. Research has frequently shown that young people often feel rushed and pressured to return to school, or that reintegration plans have moved too quickly. So it's really important to offer a flexible, small step approach that matches their needs and pace, and is paced in a way that they can cope with. Again, we sort of touched on this already, but that close liaison between home and school is really important. We need to work very closely with families. Parents, carers are the first to spot these early warning signs, as I've already mentioned, and often parents, carers have the most in-depth knowledge of their child's needs and what's worked well in the past, and that will help inform what will work well in the future. And of course, the strength and protective factors. So it's identifying and enhancing the strengths and things that are going well, and that can be instrumental to building and increasing resilience to maintain attendance or return to school. So an example of that could be thinking about and focusing on lessons that they enjoy or teachers they have a good relationship with. If they have friends, trying to give them opportunities to, and encouraging by the friends, clubs or hobbies that they enjoy. And linking it to their goals and aspirations. So most children do have some sort of goals and aspirations, and making sure they understand how, if they do these things, if they want to do these things as an adult, school can help them get there. So again, it's assessing within partnerships, including the young person, planning roles and responsibilities in active partnerships, doing those things together and reviewing the multiple resources. And again, that completely aligns with what all schools should be doing with children with special educational needs. So again, I won't go into this in too much detail, but that shared narrative is really important. We all love that phrase, as psychologists, it takes a village to raise a child. And the child's voice is really, really important in all this. We must be compassionate and we must be child-centered. What we can see happening more and more is breakdown of trust between parents, between schools, between local authorities, and all of those things. And it's really important in EBSA that we try and hold that together, and we try and shift away from blame culture, because whenever there is a blame culture, the voice of the child often gets lost. And research shows that children often believe that their EBSA is not truly believed or understood by those around them. It's really important that we revisit language when discussing EBSA, because there's often a risk of misinterpretation that the child doesn't want to attend school. So again, phrases like the child is lazy, the child is naughty, this can disempower the child and the network from around them. And often, children's behavior is judgments can be made on them based on things outside of the behavior as well. We know that, whether that be ethnic background, demographics, gender, all of those things. So it's really important that we focus on the child's voice in that. Often EBSA students do want to go back to school as well, but they lack the skills and resources to do so. And that vicious cycle of anxiety that Claire was talking about undermines their confidence and ability to cope. And research suggests that children feel that the support often comes too late, and they don't take into account how they feel about their return to school. And they feel rushed, not heard, and often pressured. And that goes back to that early intervention thing. So there must be a really significant focus on shifting the story and creating a more compassionate, child-centered narrative around the EBSA. And often the answers and solutions are already there, so within the voice of the child, which can guide a unique, individualized support plan. And school and the wider network around a child can collaborate together through joint planning, which can help bridge the gap between schools and parents, creating a more aligned understanding of EBSA. Again, working with children and young people is really important. It's important that to acknowledge the child's reluctance to talk about school, because the topic is likely to make them anxious. Any talk regarding school is likely to induce anxiety, and that can create a threat response that we were talking about earlier. These anxieties are often a key barrier to accessing that child voice. So therefore, it's important to acknowledge, reassure, and say, me asking these questions doesn't mean you suddenly have to return to school. We just want to explore what your thoughts and feelings are around school to help you feel better about this, and we understand this isn't your fault. And if you talk to young people about anxiety, you normalize anxiety, which is what Sharon was talking about at the beginning, as it's all part of the spectrum of emotions. And anxiety can be helpful in some situations, but sometimes, it can misfire. And again, exploring those strengths and values, and thinking about all those sort of protective factors and that sort of thing as well. The approaches taken to support young people will depend on the child's age, level of understanding and language. So if they are able, often children find it difficult to verbalize what they're thinking, and they may prefer to draw what they're thinking or need visual prompts. Visual metaphors can help externalize the anxiety. So think about using things like drawing, an anxiety thermometer, which you can find very easily on the internet, and it can help young people sort of articulate and make sense of the EBSA. And assessments as well can help us gather more information to understand what those causes are. So again, doing things like anxiety scales, school wellbeing cards. Again, if there's a hypothesis that it could be to do with some learning need, trying to explore that as well. And similarly, working with parents and carers is really, really important too. So acknowledging the child's reluctance to talk about school because the topic is likely to make them anxious, as we've said before. We've got to work with parents and carers. So acknowledging parental well-being and resilience. Often things like school avoidance is really anxiety provoking for parents as well, and acknowledging the impact that will have on parents and the feelings they may feel about school and that sort of thing is really important. Because what we know is that that shared narrative is really important. So engaging with parents and carers was really the key to the success of our EBSA team that we had, that Sharon was the manager of. Again, acknowledging the difficult parent-child relationships and the strain that can have on the family dynamic. Parents often feel pressured, isolated, blamed, and criticized. And it's really important that we validate those parent-carer experiences and try and signpost parents and carers towards support as well. I think we've been through most of these as well, but like I've already said, you know, what we're seeing across the system is relationships between parents and carers and schools and local authorities and support systems breaking down a bit. And when working with EBSA, that is one of the most important things. And you can sometimes, if you know, parents are being threatened by local authorities, for example, due to lack of attendance, it's really hard to provide the support. So it's really important to have that narrative and acknowledge the emotional impact it's having. So there's a number of child-based factors. We've got very little time left, so I'm going to really lightly talk about this, but thinking back to those 4 functions at the beginning, which were avoid situations that elicit negative effect and provoke anxiety, escape from adversive social situations, reducing separation anxiety, and rewarding experiences at home. Many of the child-related factors on this page closely map onto the first and second functions of EBSA. So that's avoiding those situations and escape from adversive situations. This shows the importance of supporting the child to have greater insight of their EBSA, the role of anxiety through the psychoeducation that Claire was talking about earlier, and the development of the child's internal coping strategies. I won't go through these one by one, but this is being recorded and you can have the slides shared with you so you can see them again. We've also got some sort of EBSA toolkits that we're very happy to share too, that all of these are listed in. We've then got the school-based factors, and many of, you can see the school-based factors here again. So it's, you know, again, I won't go through all of them, but it's making the commitment to connection, provision of the secondary attachment figure. So really making sure there's trusting relationships between the school and the young person, and identifying any hotspots. So, you know, which of the lessons the young person finds easy, which of the lessons young people find hard, and really trying to build on the success. So if they are going to only one lesson that they find more manageable, building on that is the way to do, not suggest that it's either all or nothing, because quite often when we see things not work, it's gone into that sort of all or nothing type view of it, which can't happen. But again, I won't go into all of these because we have got 2 minutes left before questions. So the home-based factors as well. So that is, again, you know, gradually increasing the tolerance for time away from parent carers, having those calm and consistent routines, saying goodbye just ahead of those home to school transitions, and things like using visual timetables, making sure things are predictable as possible, and having that mapped through that plan we were talking about earlier. Using things like transitional objects can really help, and yeah, giving the child to prepare to return to school and managing those things around it. So, you know, if they're a child with who doesn't like crowds and they don't like arriving at school the same time as the other kids, that's a really easy adaptation they can make. They can just arrive 10 minutes earlier or 10 minutes later, whatever works. So I think I'll stop there and we'll move to questions, if that's all right. Shall I stop sharing, Lou?
Yes, please.
Jan?
Yes, please.
There we go.
Thank you. And the first question here is from Andrea, and she says, is there also consideration for children who are anxious about school but still manage to go in every day? As a result of the anxiety when in school, they're unable to learn as well. There's a risk of these children flying under the radar as they're in school and look okay, but they're not able to be present with their learning brain switched on due to anxiety. They're effectively missing from education, although being in attendance. How do you identify children who are in this group? If they are supported, it may prevent it leading to EBSA. EBSA. The challenge is identifying these children and then finding them the right support quickly and then adapting and accommodating their needs at school.
Yeah. Do you want me to answer that? Did you want to come in, Claire? I know you get lots of cases like that to the MHST.
We do. Maybe we can tag team it a little bit, Alec. That just sounds very resonant of a lot of referrals that we get into the mental health support team. We're here as an early access, short-term, early intervention support service that works with children once identified to support them with worry management, exactly just for those sort of difficulties that question was relating to. I think in terms of the identification of them, again, there's that close partnership and communication between home and school and the young person that's really crucial. So it's about staff at school knowing their young people. It's about those good mechanisms for parents and staff to communicate, but also for young people to know how they can access support if they're feeling anxious. So, for example, we go in and do wellbeing days into our settings and assemblies for different year groups, so they have an understanding about what anxiety is, what strategies they can use, and crucially, how they can access support. And I do appreciate the comment about how to access support quickly. We're lucky in MHST, our wait lists are not as short as we would like, but relatively so, around between 12 and 18 weeks, as opposed to years for some services. But the aim is exactly what that question was saying at the end, is to intervene early, teach children strategies that they can use themselves and apply themselves in school, so that to prevent difficulties getting worse or returning into EBSA. I don't know if anyone else has got anything to add. Sorry if I went off on that.
No, that was very helpful, Claire. Yeah, I was just going to add that. I mean, I totally agree. We see lots of these kids as well, and they are. It is really internal avoidance, so it's very similar. I mean, I think all the strategies that we know are the same, but it's again a real challenge. I mean, these kids are some of the. It's a nut that we haven't quite cracked, and we haven't fully worked out how to manage. I mean, the EBSA team we managed had really good outcomes, and we saw positive impacts for the overwhelming majority of kids who were referred there, but it was still slow progress. It wasn't kids going from 0 to 100%. It was kids going from 0 to 20%, from 40 to 80%. Those challenges remain. So I think it is just those small steps, like Claire spoke about, trying to prioritize the lessons they feel most able to go to and putting in as much support around them as possible. And if you don't have the resources to do that, trying to build an evidence to request extra resources in whatever way you can. I hope that answered the question. Did you want to come in, Sharon? Sorry.
Can I just come in as well? I think the other thing that we have been concentrating on within the RISE team is looking at how our classrooms are in terms of neurodiversity, and encouraging school staff to really understand neurodiversity and how that impacts children, and how by supporting those children, by having sort of neurodiverse friendly environments, that can really help all children. So not too many visuals on the walls, trying to avoid those children who struggle with their strong smells, how they can be supported around lunch times, not to have to sort of be too close to the lunch areas or avoid those areas. And those kind of things can really support all children, but particularly those with neurodiversity, and how they can be allowed movement breaks. So it's not a taboo for them. They're not being the naughty kid asking to go out and have a movement break, or just sit outside the classroom and just be quiet, sort of have like a card where they can just go out and have 10 minutes outside in the corridor or something and just be quiet and then come back in. So those kind of things really help young people within the school environment. And, you know, the earlier those things are actually offered, then the easier it is for that child to learn to manage their anxiety in a better way. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question here from Jessica. I'm a parent and my son has issues with school attendance. He's just finishing year 10 and the school have been mostly focused on attendance, threatening fines, meetings, reattendance, etc., rather than an emotional approach to the cause. He struggles with his mental health and I believe he also has undiagnosed autism. As he only has a year left, he's now just looking at it as a countdown to leaving, and it's hard to get him to engage in discussions to help increase his attendance. With such little time, is there anything I or the school can do to help, or is there not enough time left for any interventions, stroke diagnosis to help him? What's the best way to raise this with the school to move away from sanctions and more to how they can support him? Thank you.
I'll start on that one. I think it's very hard to know where you live, so I don't know what support is available in the local area. But looking on the local offer where you are, there are all sorts of supports available. So things for mental health, you've probably been signposted towards these before, but I know the Tell Me app is what we commission in Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, Berkshire. It may be that there's a mental health support team available in your area, so it may be worth referring to the mental health support teams. Mental health support teams can will take parental referrals. You know, it's very tricky to know. Obviously, there's your local wherever you live, so the local authority in which you live, everybody has a IAS, which is Independent Advice Support Service. It may be worth talking to them and saying that you feel that your son's needs is being you know, that it's going through the sanctions and you feel it needs to be about emotional mental health. You know, so there may be things available, and checking what's available in your local area is what you can do. I think yeah, it's really tricky, and for some kids, you know, that we've spoken about earlier, your son may get out of school and actually without school and all the pressures that go with it, all the sensory, all the busyness and all of this, he might do brilliantly, and he might be that school isn't the place for him. And sometimes with some kids I worked for, having that countdown isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's about having really clear that what you hope to get out of school. So yep, I've got to push through this for 2 more years, but at the end of this, if I have my GCSEs, it means I can go on to do this, and that means that I can work in this profession, or I can go and do this sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, the thing I would add is I don't think the countdown is necessarily completely a bad thing, but it is about having it within that context of I'm only here 2 more years, I've got to get something out of it. I'm not going to be happy, but it'll get me to where I need to go. Sharon or Claire, is there anything you want to add?
I'll just add quickly, Alec. The things that came to mind for me were exactly what your closing point was. There's something important about your young person focusing on his goals and values and what's important to him. And if that means, okay, I go to school enough to be able to get access the learning I need to get the qualifications I need to be able to then move on to what I want to do next. As Alex said, that might just be enough to get him through that final year of year 11. I think my other thought was, and I don't know obviously what setting you're in, but approaching his tutor, the pastoral team, perhaps the school SENCO or senior mental health lead might help explore what mental health support school might have or might be able to signpost you to in your local area.
Thank you. Can I move us on, if that's possible, just so that we can fit in a couple more questions? These are fairly similar ones from Bev, and one is from H. Bev says, mainstream schools quite often seem to be using sanctions such as detentions, which exacerbate the EBSA issues. Are there moves to help schools to move past these types of sanctions and policies? So that's one of them, and I'll come on to H's in a moment.
I mean, I think we would hope so. I think they are looking at frameworks around Ofsted and that sort of thing. There's going to be a white paper in the autumn around supporting SEND and how these issues are managed. That is a challenge that we see in some secondary schools, and it's very, very difficult. You know, yeah. I mean, I empathise. I think it is again about having that shared dialogue with the school and engaging with the pastoral team. But yeah, this is something that we come across a lot. Claire, I don't know if you've got anything to add. I know that wasn't very necessarily helpful, but yeah, we empathise with how you're feeling. It's something that we try and advocate for quite a lot. And yeah, it's about the dialogue and working with other professionals, school, and yeah.
Thank you. Excuse me. H's point was that my young man has just been diagnosed with ADHD and sensory problems, and detentions at school really bother him. How can I deal with it on a day-to-day routine?
Yeah, and I mean it's very, very tricky. I think again, I would consider contacting IAS, so wherever you are, local area IASS, and it's about having when we were talking earlier about the shared support plan, that's the sort of thing why co-production is so important, because schools do have to have rules to some degree, but why are they getting a detention, and what does school hope to gain from the detention, and all that has to be sort of thrashed out in co-production with the child, because yes, schools often say you need to have consequences, and you do need to have consequences. I don't know what's causing the detentions, but quite often for these kids who are neurodiverse or a little bit different, they're pushed through school behavior systems, and actually it's about, for these kids with EBSA, it's about taking that step back and working out what the plan needs to look like specifically for them and their needs, and it's about trying to work with the school to make sure that's done.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Alec. H says, what is IASS?
Sorry, it's Information Advice Support Service. So every single local authority in the country has something called IAS. So if you live in Wokingham, it's Wokingham IAS. Just search it on Google, they'll come up. They're funded by local authorities, but they sit separately, and they're parent advocates. So what they'll do is they'll help you contact the school. They may come to meetings to advocate for you. They will explain the system for you. So they're really good advocates to work with if you need someone to advocate for you, which many parents do, because it's tricky stuff. So yeah, everybody should be able to access one. It's wherever you live, IAS. And just Google it and it will come up straight away.
Thank you. Hannah is asking, a family I'm working with are experiencing great distress at home from trying to support their young person getting to school. There are a lot of arguments and everyone is becoming dysregulated, trying to get them in. The young person says they know on the day if they feel able to go or not, which is hard for parents to be consistent and know how each day is going to go. Are there any tips for how to manage relationship difficulties and high resistance? Do the parents listen to the young person and don't let them go on the day they feel they can't go, or is this maintaining the issue?
So I have to go at this one. So I think it is very, very stressful for parents to when their child's refusing to go and saying no, they're really, really stressed. I think a phrase I've heard, which is about leaning into the anxiety. So it's possibly that parent taking a little bit of time and thinking with their child what it is they're anxious about, and then helping them to sort of think about that, how realistic that is. So it may feel like a huge problem for the child, and like Claire said earlier, you need to recognise the level of anxiety that the child feels, and you can't say, oh, that's ridiculous, but to understand, but then to talk it through and think about what that would look like, if they did it, what would be the strategies? It's that breathing technique, what would help them, if they had particular books, if they'd had a particular, there was something that they needed to help to support them with that. Sometimes a little reward can be quite useful. Well, if you go there today, then tonight when you come in, we'll sit and watch a program you like together, or do some cooking or something like that. So that any little ideas like that a parent can think of to try to support their child. It is very difficult. We do also advocate sometimes, depending on which area you live in, parenting support. So there, there's a lot of voluntary agencies that either offer support and advice groups to parents, online chat forums for parents, or actually attending a parenting program. Those things can all help parents so that and although parents do sometimes think, oh no, I don't want to do that because that means I'm not a good parent if I have to go to a parenting program. But actually what those parenting programs do is they validate you as a parent. They do help you to understand that actually you are a good parent. The things that you've been doing are good, they are effective, that's what's recommended by the professionals, and it supports parents with consistency, because that is absolutely key to these families and these young people, is that consistency of approach. If a child one day gets away with it and they say, all right, yeah, just stay at home then and sit and do something you like, you can go on your PlayStation for a bit, then that they will, by options, we will, like, that's the gambling thing, isn't it? So you'll try that again. Whereas if it's consistent and it's no, you do need to go to school, and if you're not going to school, you do some working at home, or there's a consequence for that, then that's really powerful. But we do find, it's about building the routines. It's about being consistent with responses, and sometimes small rewards, and I'm not talking about massive financial rewards, but it's that doing something together, something they like, or go to the park, or go shopping for you need some new trainers, we do that at the weekend, or something like that child will recognise is that parent acknowledging. But it's consistency and it's support to lean into that anxiety and how the child can learn to manage it.
We've come to the end, but I've got a couple of very quick ones. Alec and Claire and Sharon, are you able to stay just to answer them very briefly, please? One is, for younger children, for example, age 8, how involved should the child be in designing their step-by-step plan to school, back to school, when this might feel too overwhelming for them?
I think, do you want me to put my 2p's worth in there? I think when we're working with parents to help them support their children's anxiety, it depends on the maturity level of the child to start off with, but generally the best evidence is that you work directly with the parent to support them to put the step plan into place. But having said that, it's really important to capture the voice of the child at an appropriate level. Perhaps, like Sharon was saying, can you work with the child to perhaps think about what reward they might like in build into that step plan, or where it starts from, so that the steps are small enough so they're manageable for the child. It's got to be really gradual and supported and structured. So it is important for them to be involved too. I don't know if anyone else has got anything to add.
No, in that case, oh, sorry, Sharon, did you want to add?
No, I wasn't going to. No, I just, sometimes we used to use in the EBSA team, as I said, Alex said about the tools, we used to have a little step ladder that we used. So that's quite a good pictorial representation for the child, just to help them understand the small steps. And it might be quite nice for them to sort of think, well, so what you're going to achieve, you're going to be able to get out of bed, have your breakfast, get dressed for school, and that's and then the child can see success on those little steps, and it's helping the child then with the school and having conversations with the school, so they can encourage that feeling of success for the child. So small things, so when the child comes into school, they're going to succeed at different things, and the teacher's going to recognise what they've done and how difficult it's been, and just say, oh, well done, Freddie, for doing that, that was good. Those small things can help a child as well. So, but again, it is as Claire said, about the maturity of the child and what's right for them.
Final question. Can I ask, this is from Katie, can I ask what work can be done in primary schools around transition into secondary schools, or is this area dependent? I feel so much more needs to be done from a transition point of view. From my experience, children that struggle in long term seem to limp through year 7, then fall apart in year 8 and 9. Also, strategies need to be discussed in school and anxiety normalised, as you mentioned. So many young people also seem to start self-harming in year 8, and this needs spoken about in schools. I don't quite, if you've got anything you can offer on that.
I'd absolutely agree, and that's a big part of what we do in MHST, particularly just to support children from transitioning from year 6 to year 7. My best hope is that that's in place across various areas. We do it by running assemblies. We have group whole class interventions that we run, so children would, for example, attend a 4 to 6 week weekly session, either as a whole class or as a small group, to prepare them where they can unpick with a practitioner what their worries and concerns might be about transition and support them over that. I think what I'd hope is that best practice would show that there's those communications between the primary school and secondary school staff, and those lines of communication also with families, children, young people, to prepare a child for what to expect from their new secondary schools. And I guess that, you know, varies from school to school and area to area. And then the other side of that, we also offer support for the year 7s once they've transitioned into their new secondary, to help them acclimatise, if you like, because there's a lot. It's a huge change, and as we've heard today, it's often a triggering factor for developing emotionally based school avoidance. So having that support both sides of the transition can be really helpful, and also empowering and educating school staff, from the people in the office to teaching staff, support staff, tutors, pastoral staff, so they can look out for signs and symptoms around anxiety to intervene early and quickly to support children. I'll be quiet and let other people add their comments.
That sounded very sensible to me. And again, you know, something we're trying to do in Reading at the moment is we're doing these multi-agency planning meetings. So all the key players in SEND, so the educational psychologist, the SEND advisory service I manage, the SEND team themselves, are all doing big joint meetings. And what we're trying to do is identify those kids through primary school, so then when we get to secondary school, we already know who they are from primary school. So we're, you know, the summer or the Easter before the child attends, we're saying, we know this child, they're in year 6 at this primary school down the road. We think we're going to have to prepare for this support. We're going to have to do this type of transition. So we're trying to build our transition offer, and it's a real important area of need.
Thank you very much. Lou, I think this is where you come in.
Yeah, no, thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. We hope this has been helpful to you. Want to thank Berkshire Futures. Thank you, Alec. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Sharon, for joining us. Really appreciate your time and your expertise. We've placed in the chat the Tell Me app, which Alec had spoken about. So please, if you are in our area, that local area, please do utilize that and do explore it as well. Really useful tool. And yeah, we really appreciate your time. There will be a survey that comes out, which will pop up shortly. Please do fill that in, just so we can understand how your experience was and so we can do better. But we really appreciate your time and hope you have a nice evening. Take care.